and there will be Q&A after that. So please, Jeremy, the time is yours.
All right, well, thank you. Can everyone hear me? Okay, I'm not muted, okay. I'm gonna actually move this screen to the side so I don't have to look at myself, and I'm gonna look at my notes. All right, well, first of all, saya ingin mengucapkan terima kasih kepada Mas Fathun dan tentu saja kepada Mas Fathun Karib dan semua panitia, the organizing committee of this conference. I want to thank. Also today, I got a package mailed all the way from Indonesia with all kinds of swag in it, all kinds of merch from this conference, including this tie, this batik tie. In case you were wondering why I wore a tie to a punk conference. So thank you very much for making me feel very welcome to this virtual conference. I thought a lot about what I was going to say today and ended up with two things. First, 5 thesis statements on where I think punk studies should go, having been there sort of at the beginning. Fathun Karib referred to something I wrote, it was published in 2008 about punks in Jakarta, because it was centered around an acara total punk that was on the outskirts of Jakarta. You know, at the time, I think musicologists and certainly popular music scholars didn't write about punk music in the non-Western world at all. And this was something very new. Most Indonesianists, as they were called in America, were writing about gamelan music. So this is quite different at the time. So since then, I've had a number of thoughts about where punk studies could be going at this point. But then after that, I had some further thoughts that occurred to me this morning as I was thinking about what I was going to say. And this is why I don't like to do PowerPoints, because they don't keep up with my thought process. I always want to say new things, and then I have to change all the slides. And so I just talk and I just read. So the thesis statements about punk start from the least controversial to the most controversial. I think the first one we probably can all agree with. And the first one reads, punk is more than music. It's a way of life. Probably can all agree with that. Punk is more than just music. To its adherents, it's a way of life and a philosophy. In his landmark study, Global Punk, Resistance and Rebellion in Everyday Life, Kevin Dunn argues that punk's promise of resistance and autonomy from oppressive mainstream society is fulfilled by the grassroots networks of DIY punk scenes that, thanks to nonprofit-motivated indie globalization, now encircle the globe. In addition to its DIY model of grassroots organization, which continues to inform global NGOs and political campaigns, still a very important form of social organization, punk culture's radical social critique allowed young people to see beyond their temporal, spatial, and ideological limitations of their immediate environments, whether they were in war-torn 1980s Peru, as Shane Green discusses in his book Punk and Revolution about the Peruvian punk scene, 1990s Indonesia, as discussed in my book and in my articles, and early 2000s Indonesia, or in later 2000s Indonesia, as discussed in the work of a lot of people who are attending this conference. Also 2000s China, as has been increasingly documented, or other places, or wherever the music and culture have taken hold. Punk's willingness to question the status quo and defy settled opinion, including its own subculture's consensus, can take unexpected turns from pro-LGBTQ punk and conservative next door in Malaysia to Islamist punk in contemporary post-authoritarian Indonesia. So that's thesis number one. But thesis number two is, even though it's not just music, punk, I think, should be studied along with other genres. That's a bit more controversial. So maybe punk, certainly to its adherents, it's not music, it's not genre. That's perhaps to reduce it too much. But it is a music-based subculture in an important scholarly sense. In fact, it's a fashion-based subculture too. So it can be fruitfully considered alongside other music-based subcultures such as metal and hip-hop. This is not always an easy pill to swallow, particularly among punk studies scholars in the West, who often have a bit of, I guess in Indonesian, the term is alergi, right? They're allergic to metal music especially, but also just any genre that isn't punk or isn't punk enough. But in fact, you can learn a lot about punk from looking at things that aren't as punk. For one thing, Indonesia is not unique in that the punk scene seems to have arisen from the metal scene. Metal generally comes first when rock music arrives in a new locale. Punk music tends to be a kind of outgrowth of a larger metal scene. Metal tends to be more commercially successful and less demanding of its fans in terms of ideological commitment. I like to think of it as sort of a series of concentric circles. You have the metal movement, which is large and diffuse, and then the punk movement, and then even smaller than that, a movement of social movements, of actual organizations for producing social change, which can sometimes be outgrowths of punk movements, which are kind of larger because of the popularity, primarily of the music, but also of the fashion. Punk is both a music-based and a fashion-based social movement and should be studied as such. Whether you take a subcultural approach or a scenic approach, it needs to be taken seriously as a movement that is involved with cultural production. That said, that gets me to thesis statement number 3, which is that punk is, once again, not just music, that perhaps the best analog for punk is as a social movement, or even better, maybe, as a religion. The zeal of punk followers is often likened to the faithful of a religious movement. It was in Indonesia that I first heard of Ian Mackay referred to as a prophet, Nabi Ian Mackay. Certainly straight edge and Krishna core have been closely linked, and the religious overtones of punk as a movement were not actually innovated by punk Muslim, but actually predated it. While punk has officially been rather hostile towards organized religion, it has always had a kind of religious zealotry to it. And in any case, in the ways it has spread around the world and developed devoted followers, it has, in its worldwide diffusion, resembled a religion, and perhaps needs to be studied as such. Now I'm hearing a lot of noise.
To Mr. Maulana Adam, please mute your speaker.
I'm sorry, is there kesulitan teknis, ya?
Enggak, di mute.
Aduh. Could someone tell me what that was?
It's a noise, punk noise, as usual. Just kidding.
Bisa
Continue, please.
dicuekin ya? Bisa
Yeah, yes,
dicuekin?
yes.
Okay.
Cuekin. Lanjut.
Okay. Maaf ya. Yes, I can't see. That's the thing. Okay. Where was I? Yes. Okay. So punk needs to be studied as a music-based subculture, but also as a social movement, and even perhaps as a religion of sorts. Now, number 4 addresses the question of who is punk scholarship for, which I think is a very important question. I have certainly, despite what was said in the introduction, I have not claimed to be a punk, even though I did try to sing along with Aryan Tiga Blas with Pupin in 2000 at their album release party. I tried to sing Atur Aku, but the microphone wasn't plugged in, so I ended up looking very foolish. That song was later made famous by Burger Kill, who covered it. But my version was not very famous because the microphone wasn't plugged in. Anyway, but I must say I don't identify as a punk, and the punks I met in Indonesia weren't very impressed with me. I don't think punk scholarship is necessarily for punks. I don't think they need to be told their music is important, and they certainly don't need to be told by outsiders. Number 4 is my contention that punk scholarship is for non-punk scholars, that we really need to convince people from outside of punk rock and punk studies that punk is important. And that is not always an easy sell. Certainly, a number of colleagues I have interacted with in the United States are convinced that punk no longer exists, or doesn't exist in any meaningful way, except in the fond memories of old people like myself. Now, if you work outside the United States, you know this isn't true, but most people in America have very little knowledge of life outside of their borders. And this is a tough sell sometimes when you are in the belly of the beast, so to speak, when you are in the colonial metropole, to convince people that the musics that originated in the metropole are much more politically and socially significant in the peripheries, in the former colonies, than they ever were in the places where they originated 40 or 50 years before. And this is something I want to emphasize, which is why my thesis number 5, my thesis statement number 5, is the most important, especially for the purposes of today. All right, so that is, and I'm going to repeat it, punks in Indonesia are well placed to make significant contributions to punk studies. Again, punks in Indonesia are well placed to make significant contributions to punk studies. There are a number of reasons for this. Now, the first one is the downfall of the New Order. A number of critics of popular music since the 1960s have maintained that because there was no revolution, because there was no dramatic structural change in Western countries, that the rock music that evolved following the 1960s, that is rap, metal, and also really hip hop counts as well, and punk music, that they were politically insignificant because they didn't cause a revolution. This is crude, but you hear it a lot, and that its manifestations in the global South are nothing more than affectations of wanting to be American and being force-fed cultural products from the colonial metropoles. These are, to my mind, misguided and outdated arguments, but I nevertheless have continually encountered them. When I try to argue against these arguments, I find that I'm not a very convincing messenger, which is why I think that Indonesians themselves are much more persuasive when saying, well, in my country, there was a revolution. It was inspired in some ways by imported underground rock music that to us didn't seem imported. This is nothing more than what I heard repeatedly when I was doing my research in the transitional period, which I wrote about, and I think needs to be repeated, needs to be restated in a way that will make an impression on scholars across the university. Now, why do we need to even bother with non-punk studies scholars, particularly in places like the United States or in Western Europe? Why do we even want to bother with a bunch of self-infatuated noodleheads like them? Well, it's a good question, but right now they have a great deal of power. I mean, power is maybe one reason why academia has so many faults, has so many hypocrisies, and has so many blind spots when it comes to its own limitations, but it's the main game in town. If you want to convince people of the value of punk, then the people you need to convince are the people who have the most important positions in the academic profession. And I think that certainly Indonesians, with their historical experience of their country, have a very good case to make. And that experience also includes Islamist punk, which, as Jim Donahue and other scholars have pointed out, and Hikmawan, I think is here, as Indra points out, Hikmawan Saifullah points out, challenges thoughts about punk's hostility, its inherent antipathy towards religion, and its inherent progressivism. Okay, so how am I doing for time? Just curious. Oh, Kari's muted.
Yes, you have 5 minutes more. Okay,
so 5 minutes to talk about a theory I'm playing with about punk and power relations. And I don't know if this makes sense or not, but it occurred to me that different music genres have different relationships to the issue of power and power relations. Sort of a Foucauldian notion that power is the sum total of force relations. If hip hop is about the empowerment of marginalized people through the agency inherent in the microphone, right? Grabbing the microphone is an expression, a claiming of agency. Metal is more about the horror and the allure of power, to quote an article I wrote with Esther Clinton about power's ambivalence. It's horror, but it's also its pleasures. I think punk views power differently. I think the thing that unites different strands of punk, and this is something that one of my graduate students has puzzled over, who studies the Detroit hardcore scene. It's a scene that spawned bands like the Necros, Negative Approach, the Meatmen, and ultimately led to bands like the White Stripes. He was wondering, what happened when with this nihilistic, angst-ridden punk you know, that became kind of a tool for social progressive values. How did that transition happen, right? Somehow the 80s turned into the 90s in America. And by the time the 2000s came along and punk was globalized and reached Malaysia and Indonesia, punk was synonymous with veganism and animal rights and anti-homophobia. And, you know, it wasn't any of that in the early 80s. So what happened? What happened, you know, this movement that used to be racist and sexist and flirting with fascism, could there be some sort of thing that unites them? An orientation towards power relations that might, in fact, encapsulate all of those different trajectories in terms of ideology. How could they possibly be based on the same music culture? Well, I thought, well, one of the things about punk is its emphasis on debasement, on the abject, on disgusting loathsome things. Indeed, it's power itself that is loathsome, that is repulsive. I think rather than viewing power as ambivalent, punk rock views power as inherently illegitimate, as loathsome, as repellent. And thus, while originally white privilege, male privilege, heterosexual privilege, the privilege of the colonizer was naturalized, was not seen as something that punk questioned, it eventually came to be. And that the more privilege was unmasked as a kind of power relation, the more it became disgusting, the more it became repulsive, repugnant, the more it became an object of punk's loathing gaze. And that, I believe, is where its power lies, whether its loathing is angst-ridden and nihilistic, or whether it is about galvanizing resistance to it. I think there is this sort of fundamental basis in loathing the coercion of power relations that kind of motivates a lot of musical production in punk rock music. And that is the sum total of my remarks. I feel humbled. I don't know if that makes it worth, you know, all the trouble it must have taken to ship shirts all the way to Ohio, but I'm willing to address questions.
Okay, thank you, Jeremy, for your keynote speech. I think it is an interesting speech, I guess, and you make some thesis on punk studies. I guess, can we accept this like a manifesto in time of crisis or something? Because the last one, I guess, maybe that's the sixth thesis on punk and power relations, I guess is still important for us to think. So let me ask for the audience, they can have a time for questions for Jeremy. So please just unmute your speakers, and then you can give questions to Jeremy.
Hi. Can I ask some question?
Sure.
Yeah, my name is Aryo.
Aryo?
Yeah, I'm from Jakarta. I agree that punk is a way of life.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Jeremy. About the punk movement related to Islam,
mm-hmm.
Do you ever hear about punk kajian official?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. There's some quite big movement in Jakarta that punker being very religious and doing like good activity. Yeah. It's like Meka, pengajian, and etc. But something that concerns me nowadays, Jeremy. Do you know in coastal Java areas such as Tegal, Pekalongan, Cirebon, there's a punk movement that consists of children who are far underage. They are 9 to 20 years old, and the oldest may be 25 years. They do not do music specifically. They prefer to hang out and commit crimes. The music is they like every kind of music, from Indonesian ska to dangdut koplo, and they just do some riot. I was make some a big event in Pekalongan areas, and then the policemen already say to me that beware of the punker. What I don't think the punk is doing riot, but yes, it does. They make some riot. They destroy anything, everything, and then I almost get in jail because I responsible about the event. Then, what's your opinion about this phenomena happen in Indonesia, especially in coastal area of Java Island? If you ever hear about this, why it can happen? Because you ever heard about Alay? Indonesian.
Alay, yeah.
It's
too much.
The punk community content the allies person, and then I think they don't. The music is not important. The important thing is the way they doing the clothes and the hair, mohawk, and etc. But the way of life, I don't know. I don't know. That's why I wanna ask you about your opinion. Why this thing can happen in Indonesia? Thank you.
Well, I was not aware of the specific phenomenon in Cirebon and the anak nakal. Are these anak jalanan who do this? The street kids? Or are they kids from broken homes?
Yes, in some, I think I was asking about who they are. Some, yes, anak jalanan, but some, it's just like a little girl with, who hang out with anak jalanan, but they actually not always broken home.
Yeah,
not always broken.
This is actually something very interesting about the punk movement in Indonesia, is that in many places, punk is only associated with university environments and middle-class students. But in Indonesia, there is an important part of the punk movement that is drunk punks, right? Punks who are working class and generally are a nuisance. They commit crimes and are disreputable and noisy and have a bad reputation. Believe it or not, this is actually one of the things that makes Indonesia kind of stand out. Makes it more like England than the United States, where punk has really been a very middle-class phenomenon. In England, it's more working class, and in Indonesia, it's more working class. The truth is, there'll never be, one particular authority saying what's real punk and what isn't. Even, as far as listening to the right music. That one of the things that I wanted to research more was the links between dangdut and koplo, which is really after my time, and class and punk, because all those things were kind of mixed up. I mean, there were lots of working class punks, and they were different than the university punks that I met. And I would have liked to have done more work with that, because I've found that there are lots more middle-class punks, that are vocal as scholars in Jakarta. But, when I was doing research, most of my punk informants were working class. And I don't think that they speak English any better than they used to. And I don't think they have greater access to the media than they used to, the mainstream media that would get to English-speaking scholars. So while I think that, those folks are certainly a source of social disorder and they make things inconvenient for folks who don't want to be associated with them, they are in some ways proof that punk is not just a movement for middle-class students. I don't know if that addresses your question at all.
Yeah. Anyway, maybe I will. Sorry.
Hello.
Now I can.
Can we have another questions from another audience, please? So we can have another more nuanced discussion on this. Maybe and after that we can return to Pak Aryo. Is there anyone have any questions?
Yeah, can I have a question?
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Yeah, Bu Tatit.
Yeah, okay. Well, this is the first time for me to join this conference, and I'm sorry to say that I used to think that this genre, this music is sometimes disturbing, and also the voice, and I cannot join, I cannot enjoy the music. But then today, okay, I get some lesson. Okay, this is very interesting. Okay, because you mentioned about something to do with the way of life, about philosophy, and then about the contribution of them to the nation. So it is really interesting, and I would like you to explain more about this kind of music and maybe the movement which has something to do with philosophy and also the contribution. What is, tell me or explain more about their contribution for the nation of Indonesia. Thank you.
Well, I've written about this at length, but one of the things about punk rock is its philosophy of DIY, which stands for do it yourself. And in Indonesia, the philosophy of do it yourself, which record your own music, sell your own music, don't go through record labels, don't go through commercial channels, package your own music, distribute it, do everything yourself, do your own concert tours, stay in people's houses, go across Indonesia, go across the country, the world. This philosophy is linked very self-consciously, very deliberately to Sukarno's philosophy of swasembada.
Swasembada.
Yeah, so it's very similar, and it's not me, but the Indonesian punks would say hampir sama. Yeah, that a lot of punk DIY philosophy would be equated with the philosophy of self-sufficiency, not only as independent artists but as post-colonial subjects. That although Indonesian punk doesn't sound Indonesian except for the language, it was a way of asserting an Indonesian identity. It was a way of asserting independence from commercial domination, and a way of asserting independence from consumerism, and also a way of asserting national pride. These were all things I found out when I was doing research 20 years ago, at a time when people thought that people who played punk music outside of the English-speaking world, those folks had no idea what they were doing, and that didn't have any meaning. And I did not find that at all. I found that they knew exactly what they were doing, and they knew why they were doing it, and it was for their own reasons. And so the fact that the music is abrasive sounding and noisy, basic, as people put it, was part of its appeal too. But I also found in Indonesia, basic was okay. It was, it was annoying, but, because in Indonesia there's keramaian, basic isn't so bad. It's not as threatening as it is in the United States. In the United States, people hate noise. They, they can't stand it. And Indonesia, everyone's used to it. So it's not as threatening as it is where I'm from, where loud music like metal and punk are much more disreputable, much less well thought of. But yeah, it's fun music, it's loud music, and people enjoy it, but it also seems to have some very serious pro-patriotic and pro-independence, anti-colonial meanings to it when Indonesians take it seriously.
Mm-hmm.
Also, a lot of people who are active in the punk movement were also active in the student movement that overthrew the Orba. So that was the other. Yes.
There is also questions in the chat.
In the chat, yes. I can't keep track. There's so many.
Oh, okay. No, I can wait. There is from Nabila Alifa. I will read it for you. Nabila Alifa asked, Mr. Jeremy, is nihilism actually came from being punk, or that the punk life led some people to be nihilistic? And that's the first questions. And I guess Mita Kusma wants to ask another questions. You can ask Mita, please.
Okay, I'm sorry. I can't do two things at once. Could you ask that again?
Oh, okay. Right. So we do it once. So Nabila asked, is nihilism actually came from being punk?
I think, so that's a very, I read that.
Or
yeah,
that
it's a
the
very
punk
good question.
led some to be nihilistic?
That's a very good question, and I don't know if there's a good answer. I don't think that the music brainwashes people, but I also think that it encourages people to go in the direction they're already going. I don't think that the music is neutral or only tells people what they already know. I think that that you can become more nihilistic listening to nihilistic music. You can have your opinions change in your encounter with compelling art. I mean, that is one of the points that, of art. There's actually a quote I wanted to end with that I forgot about. I was going to end my talk with saying that the classical music conductor Leonard Bernstein once said, art cannot change events, but it can change people. If one is addressing an impossibly complex topic, like music and its relation to social change, I suppose one might as well be succinct. To argue, as many have, that punk has failed to make the world a better place is to assume that we all know what the world would be like without it. It also assumes that we know its work is done. Maybe perhaps present appearances to the contrary, punk is just getting started. So that's what I was going to say, and then I forgot. So it may be that people get more nihilistic if that's what they choose to listen to. Now, you could also choose to listen to punk that is not nihilistic. So it's always a choice. You might choose to become less nihilistic, and it's a complex interplay of choice and persuasion when one listens to a kind of music one likes. But I think most of it is choice, right? I think the nihilism has to predate you choosing to listen to something. Because if you don't, have any sort of reason to be susceptible to punk's message, you're just not going to like it. People listen to this music because they like it. That's the the biggest finding of anybody. I mean, I've talked to people who have, you know, played this music for 20 years and asked them why, and they say because they like it. Why do people listen to punk music? You like it. I mean, that's, you know, it's not because you're brainwashed. That really makes no sense.
Okay, thank you, Jeremy. Is Miss Mita want to speak, or do I need to read your questions in the chat?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Hi, Jeremy. I have a question for you. As you mentioned earlier about LGBT punk in Malaysia and Islam punk in Indonesia, does every country has a different kind of punk or having their own specific punk? I'm just curious because I don't really know about punk. Thank you.
There are a lot of similarities, but every country has its own kind of permutations. Malaysia has its own Islamic punk movement. That way, you know, we're talking about different people who choose to take up things in the global punk network, and that's how certain bands form. But
thank you so much for answering my question, Jeremy.
You're welcome.
Okay, there is also Miss Osa Martija. You want to have questions, or do I read your questions? Miss Ose Martija.
Hello.
Oh, sorry. I thought it was Miss. Sorry.
Hello. No, I just want to add a point regarding what Jeremy said. Like the point of Sir Jeremy explaining the difference between middle class student, punk network, Indonesian punks, which is mostly working class punks. And in my part, that is very similar here in the Philippines. Most punks here are working class punks, of course, about the movement, but rather live with DIY, rejecting mainstream values way of life. That's it.
Yeah, I saw your comment. I know nothing about really the punk scene in the Philippines, and it makes sense that it would work out that way. It's hard to know. You know, there is no. A couple people have seemed to be asking me about quantifiable data that we have on punks in the world. I wish we had that data. I wish we had access to it, but other than the internet, which I think is a very class-biased resource, but other than, you know, what we get from Facebook groups and things like that, which I don't believe can be terribly reliable, we don't have a lot of quantifiable data about membership in the punk subculture because, first of all, how do you define membership? And second of all, you just don't have reliable data gathering methods. It's very difficult to actually encounter reliable quantifiable data on this phenomenon. It means that most studies of punk are ethnographic, which contains a number of limitations, right? So, for example, I can't tell you, and I don't think any of the people who've worked on punk in Indonesia really can tell you if there are more working class punks or more middle class punks, except that there are far more working class people in Indonesia. So I would think the latter, but I don't know. You know, it's not something I can really say. There's no data on it. And also, this goes back to the Koplo kids. right? The anak jalanan, are they punks? Do they count? How do we count them, right? They may only have dyed hair, but listen to koplo. You know, if they're listening to koplo, you know, does that mean they're not real punks? You know, so there's a whole bunch of methodological issues when it comes to actually generating a data set. So I don't know, you know, what the solution is to that.
Okay, thank you, Jeremy. Well, because it's questions about comparative questions between Indonesia and Philippines, I guess there is Joe Kid here. You know Joe Kid, right? Hey, Joe,
yeah.
Can you give comment on Malaysian issues on this?
I saw that and I thought,
yeah. Hey, Joe.
Okay. Hello.
Yeah.
Hold on.
Hey,
hi, everyone. Okay. You. Hello, guys. I'm just here listening in. So, in terms of I'm just saying that in terms of the problem here that I see is when you when you mention a certain kind of groupings in the punk scene in all these countries, it's like when you say LGBT punks in Malaysia, there's only a few of them, like 2 bands, and so there is this problem of seeing it as a big, you know. Do you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, because the numbers are not big, and so it's not really. It doesn't represent.
No. It's just an example. It's not
yeah,
representative.
But still, I'm saying it's very nominal, so you can't really put it as a. Yeah, even to call it as a scene also, it's very, very small.
No, it's just a few bands. I know that. I'm sorry if I gave that impression. It's actually quite extraordinary that there are any. It really. Now, you asked me to comment on the Malaysian scene. You are the expert on the Malaysian scene, so I defer to your expertise, Mr. Kidd. When I saw you had read some of my articles on social media, I thought, oh, I hope I didn't make any terrible mistakes. So I don't think I could say anything that you don't know.
No, I mean, it's very interesting. I I am still looking for a lot of answers because I can't kind of like represent a scene, but this is what I know since I was involved since the beginning of it. So I cannot know certain parts of it. But you know, being an old guy in the scene, you might not know a lot of the younger ones, how they're doing it, how are things going for them and things like that, you know. I might be removed from what's happening now in some ways, you know. So, yeah.
Well, as a fellow old guy, I share that problem.
Okay, I think our time is getting limited. There is still a lot of questions for you, Jeremy, but sorry, I have to pick one last questions because the time is going to be finished. So there is one from Paige Clemento. Do you want to speak or do I have to read your questions?
Hey,
hello?
How you going?
Yeah. Okay, this is the last question, please.
Oh, it's a good one. Yeah.
Sorry, it's a bit spicy, maybe. But I was just wondering if you could speak more on the idea of non-punks telling punk stories, especially in academia where white dudes have typically spoken on behalf of different communities. Should people not directly involved in punk or similar scenes be sharing this authenticity? How much can we trust the ways an outsider has portrayed stories? And I suppose I'm coming from the point of view of women and people of color being written out of histories. And I'm really sorry for the long question. I'm thinking out loud.
I don't apologize. It's a very good question. And I do have an answer for it. I think anybody like me should have an answer for a question like that. And the answer is this. I was invited to be here, and that's why I'm here. And I was invited by the host of this conference, who have found my work to be useful. I was writing about it, and I, helped open the door and other people have run with it. You know, I think that people like me have a role to play. You know, there was a time when we were encouraged to denounce our privilege, right? And that didn't work so well because that was kind of quixotic. And then the cry came out to weaponize our privilege. And, you know, rather than disavow our institutional advantages, to use them to make things better for the people who come after us. And that seemed more doable. I have been trying to do that. In my talks, I have been trying, rather than promote my own research, I've been trying to give suggestions for other people to do research. I don't know if that addresses your question satisfactorily. You don't look very satisfied, but you got to have something for folks like me to do, you know, in your brave new world, and feel free to respond.
Sorry, I was thinking, didn't mean to look unimpressed.
Oh.
Well, I guess it's a very interesting questions, but I guess if I can give some comment on that, I mean,
yeah,
it's important to have a collaborations, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, between
yes.
scholar and punks, and some punks that doing scholar activities. So there are three actors that basically doing this thing, right? First, first is the scholar, non-punk scholar. Second is the punk, and third is the punk scholar or punk academia. So I guess this punk scholar network give this kind of room or space for all of us to collaborate, I guess. I mean, Paige question is kind of like integrating. I mean, because at the same time, Jeremy is an outsider, right? I mean, in the context of ethnography, how can you represent the voice of this community, for example, like the subaltern voice? But on the other side, I think if we have collaborations and discussions along the way, again, I think we can have a more productive understanding of what is punk from many different point of view. That's my take on this. So I'm really sorry for other audience that asked the questions, because we have like 10 questions and only half that Jeremy answered, but I already saved the questions. So I hope there is a mechanisms after this conference that Jeremy can maybe answer the questions writtenly or something. So thank you very much for everyone coming to this session. Hope you still can watch until the conference finished. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much to Mr. Jeremy Wallach and Mr. Fathun Karib for the presentation. To all of the audiences, please go back to the main room because we are going to enter another session, quiz session. Or if you want to join room B, you can join another room. Just let the host know, okay? So please, to all of the audiences, go back to the main room and keep watching us until the end of the conference, because we are going to give you lots of free gifts, okay? Right now, let's back to the main room to all of the audiences.